What's up guys, Jake here. So we have a very serious topic today, and that is gatekeeping within the community. Now I'm going to focus this mainly around asexual and aromantic discrimination and gatekeeping, but this does extend to other minority identities as well. So the big question, why do people think that aro-ace people don't belong in the LGBT plus community? Now I took to Twitter with this one. I already had a few ideas, but I wanted to really get a broad range of why people think that aro-ace people shouldn't be included. And I came out with some really quite interesting ideas. I'm kind of here to debunk those. So the first one is, they don't face systematic oppression and they're not oppressed. Now the definition of oppression is prolonged, cruel or unjust treatment. So I'd say that yes, asexual people do experience that. I have a friend who would argue vividly that they have experienced cruel and unjust treatment based on the fact that they are asexual. Feel free to correct me if you think that's not what oppression is. I think we have this idea that oppression only comes in the form of the law not being in your favour or being fired from your job because you identify as a certain thing. And that's not all of what oppression is. Oppression is within our society, it's within our media, it's the way people treat you, it's their attitudes towards what you are. Another argument is that asexual people don't belong in our community because they can choose to disclose it. This operates on the assumption that people of other sexualities can't choose not to disclose their identity as well, or that all asexual people are either aromantic or heteroromantic. Asexual people still have relationships, and it might be a relationship that appears to other people as a queer relationship, so they therefore can still face discrimination. This next argument is one that I think is a much deeper issue. It goes further and it runs deeper than just this statement and what I'm going to say afterwards. People say, I've met ace and aro people who are homophobic or transphobic. Now, if you think homophobia and transphobia within this community is a new thing, you are utterly incorrect. I've encountered far too many transphobic queer people, and surprisingly, far too many homophobic trans people. We shouldn't be gatekeeping an entire group who identify a certain way because you stereotypically perceive them to be phobic of certain other identities. Do people not realise how hypocritical that concept is? You say, I don't want ace people in my community because they're phobic of these identities. That in itself, you're making an assumption and a stereotype about these people that you think they're making about you. It's like, it's such a mindfuck. You have the right to educate these people and potentially remove them from individual safe spaces, but you can't police an entire identity. You can't say, I think your people are phobic of my people, so you can't come into my safe space. You don't own a safe space. There is no monopoly on safe spaces in this community. There is no one identity that is more important than the other or more valid than the other. So the next argument is that ace people have passing privilege. Hey, so I often have passing privilege. A lot of the time, I pass as a cis man. Some of my straight trans friends have passing privilege. I think this is a flimsy argument that bases itself off of the assumption that identities look a certain way. It's like assuming that someone's gender based on their expression, or assuming that you can tell how somebody identifies their sexuality by how they look. There are so many types of identities within this community that have a passing privilege. You could be in what people perceive to be a heterosexual relationship. People in that relationship, they could be demi, bisexual, non-binary, trans. There are a multitude of reasons why a heterosexual appearing relationship could belong in our queer community. You can't tell that based on how they present themselves. This is a wider issue that we all faced, and it is not exclusive to one identity. Lots of people from all areas of the spectrum benefit from passing privilege. Are we kicking out all the people that have that benefit? No, because that's not what we do. That's not what the queer community is. That's not what it means. And also, we don't have the right. We don't have the right to kick out one person or a collective of people because of how society perceives them. It baffles me that people think they have that right, to say you pass as something that you're not, so you don't face the same oppression and you don't face the same issues. So I believe that we have no right to gatekeep safe spaces and this community based on how people identify. If they identify as something other than cisgender, heterosexual, and heteroromantic, they belong here. They belong in this community. Unless you check all three of those boxes, you are queer. And the assumption that asexual people who identify as heteroromantic or aromantic people who identify as heterosexual don't belong in this community is kind of boggling too, because we already have straight people in this community. We have straight trans people, and to believe otherwise is trans exclusionary. So I have a friend who is bisexual and heteroromantic and is in a straight passing relationship. Do they not belong in this community as well? If you're saying this person has passing privilege, they're not trans, they're in a straight relationship, but they're bisexual, they still experience oppression, they have still been discriminated against. Are you saying because of how society perceives them, because of how they pass, they don't belong in this community? If that friend thinks they belong in this community, they do. On the other hand, people might identify as a certain thing but feel like they don't want to be within the community, they don't want to consider themselves a part of that, because they themselves haven't personally experienced oppression or discrimination. That's fine as well. If you identify as ace aro and you think you don't identify as queer, or you don't identify as LGBTQ+, and you don't want to be a part of the community, you don't have to be. My point is, if you face discrimination, prejudice, and erasure based on your identity, you belong in this community. So there's sometimes a need for separating gender and sexuality into two different safe spaces or support groups because we face vastly different issues. But providing different types of safe spaces doesn't have to incorporate discrimination. What gives one person the right to decide if someone's different enough to belong? Asexual, demisexual, and romantic attractions are not part of main dominating identities. We all face the same feeling that society is not catering to us. The world is hyper-sexualized, it is cis-dominated, and it is heterocentric. People who fall outside of that deserve support. Gatekeeping only plays into the idea that one identity is more important or valid than the other, and by doing so, you're mirroring how society has made you feel. It's not just a battle for equality in law. It's a battle for equality and acceptance in society. It's a battle for social change and harmony. You can't expect to find that by invalidating others. So if ace aro people don't belong in our community, and they don't belong in the wider idea of the cis-het community, where do they belong? This is just another example of marginalization based on not understanding and not accepting people. If you discriminate against people based solely on their identity and the labels they use, I don't think you do belong in this community. Everyone should have that opportunity to learn, but if you don't learn, I don't think you have a right to be here and to be in our safe spaces. You might consider yourself queer, but I don't think people who discriminate should be allowed in safe spaces. But the point is, everyone started somewhere. We've all had these bad ideas in our head at some point. It's been taught by society and it's been reinforced by our education. We all start somewhere, we all come along this journey at a different pace. So you might encounter some people in this community that are not up to speed, they still hold harmful views, or they still say things that offend you. Our reaction should not be to be defensive and to kick them out. Our gut instinct should be to sit them down and have a calm conversation about how we can educate them. It should be to redirect them to resources. And I'm not saying that that goes for everyone. I'm not saying everyone in this community has to be an educator or has to put up with discrimination and has to be a walking dictionary. But I'm saying if someone's discriminating, you shouldn't close the door and kick them out of our community on a whole. You shouldn't look at one type of person and say, I've experienced discrimination from you, you don't belong in my space, because you don't own that space. You are not the monopoly of that space, you are not more important than any other person. Just because a person hasn't grown and evolved at the same pace as you doesn't mean you're better than them. And I think this elitism within our community is so toxic and damaging, and it's only sending us down a path that's going to lead to us being worse off than we've ever been. We might be moving in leaps and bounds with the law and with how society views us, but if we can't settle our own inner conflicts with peace, then what can we do? So I don't believe in gatekeeping based solely on how someone identifies. Feel free to disagree with anything I've said, because I'm always open to education and self-improvement. I might have worded something off the cuff in a way that's not 100% accurate. I have been known to do that in the past in some videos, and I will always go back and retract or amend that statement. But recently I've seen far too much negativity towards people I care about to not chime in on this issue. I have some lovely ace, aro, and demi friends and people of other romantic attractions that people don't think should belong in this community, and I say, who the fuck are you to tell them they don't belong? I think people who refuse to learn and refuse to grow and keep discriminating are the people that don't belong in our safe spaces. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't belong in our community on a whole, because saying a gay or a lesbian person who is transphobic isn't queer or isn't LGBT is fundamentally incorrect. Saying that those people don't belong in our safe spaces is fair enough in a sense, because if you're going to enter a room where people finally feel accepted and you're going to make them feel like shit about how they identify, you need to get the fuck out. You get the fuck out or read a fucking book. But I think the point in general is being queer and being part of this community doesn't necessarily mean you're educated. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to discriminate and you're not going to be prejudiced towards other identities. That's just a reality that we have to face and we have to find a way to fix, or to coexist in a way that doesn't involve this inter-community fight and battle. We're supposed to be fighting society for acceptance. We're supposed to be campaigning for laws to be changed. We're not here to sit and point fingers and say, you're not queer enough, you don't belong here. Because if we face prejudice, if we face discrimination, and if we face oppression, or any one of those things based on how we identify, we belong, we are valid. We should be standing together. We shouldn't be separating ourselves into different rooms and bitching behind each other's backs. This is not high school, this is life. I think there are a lot of people out there who just need to grow up, accept it, and move on. Take it on a case-by-case basis. If somebody enters your safe space and they start chatting shit about how you identify, deal with it in a way that is fair and appropriate. Don't look at one identity and say, I've experienced this from your people, or I've experienced that from your people and I don't like you. That's not fair. It's not your choice to make. So, I got very angry and very passionate, but I think I made some good points. I'd love to hear some feedback from some ace aro people and some other minorities, and how you feel you are perceived in the community, what you think your place is, and yeah, just basically continue this discussion, because I think it's really fascinating and I'm very interested in it. So, yeah. This has been fun. This is probably going to be another fucking long video, so I'm sorry about that, but I just have a lot of opinions. Again, I was quite angry at certain points in this video. I am not attacking individual people, I'm attacking a concept and an idea that exists in this community, and I know that for a fact because I have experienced it. Not about necessarily my own identity, but about my friends and about people I care about, so I'm not an authority on this matter either. I'm just one angry queer to another. It's just how I feel. I will see you next week. Peace out, bitches.